The campaign for the Battle of Blue Hole is currently in the middle of a two-pronged attack by the House Corbin forces against the League forces. Last episode we resolved the Battle of Tortel Valley, and now we'll take a look at the second prong attack, the Battle of Frigidcape. Welcome to Frigidcape. This area has a few industrial buildings with a construction factor of 4. All the residential and commercial buildings have a construction factor of 1. Let's take a quick look at the defense forces the Chupacabras have deployed. The 8th Battle Lance is comprised of an Atlas, Stalker, Loki, and a Blackhawk. They have 6 lucky points and the Atlas is a veteran mech warrior. The 9th Battle Lance has a Night Star, Annihilator, an Archer, and a Gargoyle. They also have 6 lucky points, and the Night Star has a veteran mech warrior. Additional elite forces includes a lance of motorized scouts and a VTOL spotter assisting the Thumper artillery as battlefield support. House Corbin forces are attacking with an armored company and a mech company. The armored company has 2 lances of Commissary light tanks and 1 lance of LRM carriers. The armored company is leading the assault on Frigidcape. Arriving in turn 2 is the Alpha Company, which includes the 1st mech lance, which has a Jenner, Wraith, Wasp, and a Locust. And they took Speed Demon, giving it to the Locust. The 2nd Battle Lance has 2 Banshees and 2 Grasshoppers. The 3rd Battle Lance has an Atlas, Centurion, a Masakari, and a Vulture. All the mech warriors are green, but both lances have 6 lucky points each. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get into turn 1. Alright, we roll for initiative for turn 1, and it looks like House Corbin wins. The Chupacabras must move and shoot first. The Chupacabras move their 8th Lance, sprinting onto the board looking for some good defensive positions. House Corbin then moves their tanks straight up the center of the map. Chupacabras send their 9th Lance in next, ground moving to continue to beef up the right side of the map. House Corbin activates their next lance of tanks and moves also onto the right side of the map. Chupacabras move their Scout Lance, following the Loki and the Blackhawk. House Corbin sends in their LRM carriers, which takes a position also onto the right side of the map. Finally, the Chupacabra VTOL comes onto the battlefield. For the shooting phase, the VTOL was able to tag one of the LRM carriers and call in artillery, bringing the target number to a 6. The Thumper artillery nails the carrier, doing 1 damage. The rest of the Chupacabras don't have line of sight, and House Corbin fires back. 2 LRM carriers and 2 tanks have line of sight on the VTOL. The target number was astronomical, but you know what? Sometimes you just gotta lob a few missiles into the air, and they all miss. We roll for initiative. Chupacabras win. House Corbin will move and shoot first. House Corbin activates one of its tank lances and moves forward, taking a position on the hill. The Chupacabra's 8th Lance activates. The Blackhawk and the Loki sprint into cover, while the Atlas and Stalker march down the right side. House Corbin moves its 2nd Take Lance forward into the middle of the map. Chupacabras now move their light scouts a tad farther down the road. Because BattleTech Alpha Strike requires proportional movement when there are unequal numbers, House Corbin will move 2 units this turn. The 1st and 2nd Lance enter the battlefield. The Chupacabras activate their VTOL and move it back to a position on a hill to have observation of the center of the map. House Corbin activates their last 2 units, the LRM carriers and the 3rd mech lance. The 3rd Lance enters the right side of the map. The LRMs move to the right side of the map, using the hill for defilade. The Chupacabra 9th Lance continues to advance on the right, with the Annihilator sprinting to keep up. It seems the Chupacabras are concentrating on the right and center of the map, while House Corbin is stacking on the left. We'll see how this plays out as the battle continues. On to the shooting phase for turn 2. House Corbin will shoot first. So it turns out most units don't have line of sight, but the tanks on the hill and the 3rd Lance can see the Gargoyle, so they open fire. With a skill of 5, TMM of 2, and long range makes the target number an 11. Even using lucky points, all miss with the exception of the Atlas, which deals 2 damage to the Gargoyle's armor. The Chupacabras return fire. Elements of the 8th and 9th Lance shoot back at the tanks, each one targeting a different tank. Despite using lucky points, they all miss except for the Night Star, which burns away all the armor of that tank. The Chupacabras call in artillery, and unfortunately it missed, flashing harmlessly near its target. Looks like the Chupacabras win initiative again. House Corbin will move and shoot first. House Corbin activates their tanks and advances off the hill. The Chupacabras activate the 8th Lance. The Black Hawk jumps on top of the building, while the Loki ground moves. The Atlas and Stalker advance towards the mansion on the hill. Realizing the Chupacabras are getting the better cover on the right, House Corbin activates his 3rd Mech Lance and sprints to get into better positions. The Chupacabra VTOL elects to stand still. Back to proportional movement, House Corbin activates their tank and LRM carriers. The tanks continue to advance, and the LRM carriers climb to the top of that hill. Next up, the Chupacabras advance their scouts, taking cover behind some buildings. Finally, House Corbin activates his last 2 lances. The 1st lance moves forward, with the Locust sprinting into cover, and the Wasp taking cover in some woods. The 2nd Mech Lance continues their general advance. And last but not least, Chupacabra advances their 9th Lance up the right, with the Gargoyle taking cover behind that industrial building. On to the shooting phase. House Corbin will shoot first. The 2nd Lance, as well as the Wasp, open fire on the Black Hawk. Because the Wasp has intervening woods and is at medium range, the target number is 11, but the 2nd Lance is at long range, so its target number is 12. The Wasp and Banshee hit, dealing 5 damage to the Black Hawk, removing all its armor. Since the Banshee rolled a 12, it's an automatic roll on the critical table, which was a 2, Snake Eyes, which is an ammo hit. But luckily for the Black Hawk, it has Case, so it survives, but takes 1 structural damage. Next, the tanks, the Jenner and Wraith, as well as the LRM carriers, all fire at the 8th Lance Atlas. The target number for the tanks is 8. Since there are intervening woods, the target number for the Jenner and the Wraith is 9. The LRM carriers are at long range, so their target number is 10. The Jenner hits, dealing 3 damage. The Chupacabras return fire. They open up with an artillery barrage on the badly damaged tank. This time it scores a hit, destroying the tank. Next, the Gargoyle and Archers shoot at the Jenner. With a skill of 4, TMM of 3, plus cover and medium range, the target number is a 10. The Gargoyle missed, but the Archer hit, dealing 7 damage, enough to destroy the Jenner outright. Next, the Night Star, Atlas, Annihilator, and the Stalker each shoot at one of the LRM carriers at long range. Target number is 9, but it is an 8 for the Night Star and Atlas due to their superior Mech Warrior skills. The Night Star and Stalker hit, each dealing 4 damage to an LRM carrier. This caused structural damage to both, needing a critical roll for both of the LRMs using the vehicle critical hit chart. First was a 9, which is a weapon hit. The other was a 4, damaging its fire control. The Black Hawk shoots back at the Wasp. Due to cover, medium range, as well as jumping, it had a very high target number, and it missed. This brings turn 3 to a close. House Corbin has lost a tank and a mech, but it continues its assault onto Frigidcape. So let's take a look at the initiative roll, and it looks like House Corbin wins initiative. The Chupacabras will move and shoot first. The Chupacabras activate their 8th Lance and continue to move into cover. For proportional movement, House Corbin will move 2 units. The tanks advance on the Gargoyle, and the 3rd Mech Lance moves into cover, with the Vulture ground moving right up to the Gargoyle. For the Chupacabras, their VTOL stands still. Again, House Corbin needs to activate 2 units. First, the tanks move into that small neighborhood, and the LRM carriers decide to stand still. That makes them sitting ducks, but House Corbin players want to get at least 1 more turn of good shooting from them. The Chupacabras activate their 9th Lance. The Atlas and Stalker take cover at the mansion. The Black Hawk jumps into the courtyard, and the Loki takes cover at that building. House Corbin activates the 1st Lance. The Wraith and Wasp jump into cover, and the Locust takes cover in the village. For the Chupacabras, the Scouts stand still, holding their position. For House Corbin, the 2nd Lance continues to push up on the left side. On to the shooting phase. The Chupacabras will shoot first. The Gargoyle is in a tough spot and will likely go down, so the Chupacabras focus on the Massacre. The Gargoyle, Archer, Atlas, and Stalker all take aim. For the Archer and Gargoyle, the target number is 8. However, because the Atlas is at long range, its target number is 9 and the Stalker is 10. The Archer, Gargoyle, and Atlas all hit, dealing a total of 15 damage, which is enough to destroy the Massacre, though it will still be able to shoot this turn. Next, the VTOL calls in artillery on one of the damaged LRMs, and it nails it, taking its last point of structure. Next, the Annihilator and Night Star shoot at one of the undamaged LRM carriers, each with a target number of 8. And they roll a 12, doing critical damage. This wipes out all its armor and damages its structure, and with a roll of 5 on the critical damage for the vehicles, fire control is damaged. The Night Star also hit, dealing 4 damage, but rolled a 7 on the critical roll, causing no critical damage. Next up, the Black Hawk and one of the scouts fire at one of the tanks in the neighborhood. Target number is 7 for the scout and 10 for the Black Hawk, and they both missed. The Loki and scout shoot at another tank. The scout's target number is 7 and the Loki's is 8. They both hit, stripping all the armor off of that tank. Now, House Corbin returns fire. 3 tanks and the 3rd mech lance all fire at the gargoyle. Target number for the tanks and Vulture is 7 due to the short range, and target number is 9 for the rest of the mechs at medium range. 3 tanks, the Vulture and the Masakari all hit, dealing 12 damage, which is more than enough to destroy the gargoyle. All the LRM carriers fire at the archer, with a target number of 8 because the LRM carriers had stood still. However, one of the LRM carriers has fire control damage from turn 3, so its target number is 10. And unfortunately, they all missed. The tanks shoot back at the Loki, and they also all missed. At this time, no other mechs or vehicles have line of sight, so we move into turn 5. Alright, we roll for initiative, and House Corbin wins. Chupacabras will move and shoot first. The Chupacabras activate the 9th Lance first, sprinting their archer to get behind cover at the mansion, and she also ground moves her Night Star and Annihilator back. House Corbin activates his tank lance and pushes towards the mansion. The 3rd mech lance advances on the right, moving from cover to cover. The Chupacabras order their scouts to stand still again. House Corbin activates 2 units again. The tanks in the neighborhood advance on the road. The 1st lance also advances. The Wasp and Wraith both jump into position, and the Locust moves past the scouts into a position behind them. The Chupacabras then activate their VTOL, and this time flies to get in behind the Wraith. House Corbin then advances their LRM carriers on the right. Chupacabras activate their last unit, the 8th mech lance. The Atlas and Stalker stand still. The Black Hawk jumps onto the hill, also behind the Wraith, and the Loki moves back. House Corbin activates their last unit as well. Since the 2nd lance has not had line of sight this entire game, they decide to sprint them so they can close the distance between them and the enemy. Onto the shooting phase. The Chupacabras open up their shooting with another artillery barrage against one of the heavily damaged LRM carriers, and it nails it, destroying the LRM carrier. The Atlas, Stalker, both standing still, shoot at the Vulture. The target number is 8 for the Stalker, and it is a 7 for the Atlas, and both hit, destroying the Vulture outright. The Night Star and Annihilator shoot at the Centurion. The target number for the Night Star is 7, and it is a 10 for the Annihilator. Using their lucky points, the Night Star hits, dealing 5 damage. Next up, the Black Hawk and the VTOL fire at the rear of the Wraith. The target number for the VTOL is 8, and a 10 for the Black Hawk because it had jumped, and unfortunately they both missed. Next up, the 2 scouts shoot at the severely damaged tank. The target number is 5, and they both hit, destroying one of the tanks and damaging another. The Loki and a scout shoot at the Locust. Target number is 9 for the Loki at medium range and 7 for the scout, and they both miss despite the Loki using a lucky point. House Corbin can now shoot back. The tanks and the Locust open fire on the scouts, and in the end, 2 scouts were completely destroyed. Next, the Wraith and the Wasp fire at the Loki. The target number is 9. The Wraith hits, dealing 3 damage to the Loki's armor. The LRM carriers, the Atlas, the Centurion, the tanks, as well as the Vulture, all fire at the Night Star. The Vulture and 2 tanks all hit, dealing 4 damage to the Night Star's armor. Well, that brings turn 5 to a close. Wow, there's a lot of destruction out there. It looks like the House Corbin assault on the right might be petering out, but the attack on the left might just turn the Chupacabra's flank. On to turn 6. Here we are in turn 6, and it looks like the Chupacabras win initiative. House Corbin decides to move his tanks in position to get shots off against the Night Star, while putting distance between the tanks and the other mechs. The Chupacabras now activate their VTOL, who wants to keep line of sight on the LRM carriers for improved artillery strikes. House Corbin next activates 3rd Lance. Too afraid to advance forward, but also afraid to stand still, shifts his mechs to different cover. Next, the Chupacabras decide to move their scouts back into cover of that neighborhood. For proportional movement, House Corbin activates 2 units. The tanks push aggressively into the Chupacabra lines, while the LRM carriers, aware that artillery is trying to zero them, advance forward to close on the Night Star. Very much aware that her left flank is likely folding, she tries to regroup her 8th Lance to the center. The Loki ground moves while the Blackhawk jumps. The Atlas and Stalker stood still. House Corbin activates his last 2 lances. Realizing the Chupacabra player made a mistake jumping so close to the Locust ground moves to directly behind the Blackhawk. The Wraith and Wasp also jumped into the rear of the Blackhawk. Therefore, the Blackhawk can't fire on either of those 3 mechs. That maneuver really bummed the Chupacabra player. And finally, the last unit for House Corbin to move this turn, the 2nd Lance. The 2 Banshees ground move down the road, with the blue Banshee apparently trust-falling the industrial building. Just kidding. Miniatures, am I right? The 2 Grasshoppers then jump into cover of the neighborhood. The Chupacabras move their last lance, the 9th Lance. The Archer and Annihilator stand still, and the Night Star backs up into cover. On to the shooting phase. House Corbin will shoot first. House Corbin really wants to take down at least one of the 2 veterans that the Chupacabras brought to the battle, and so they decide to focus on the Night Star. 3 tanks, the 2 LRM carriers, the Atlas, the Centurion, and the 2 Grasshoppers all unload on the Night Star. Due to the range and cover, it's a tricky shot, especially for the LRM carriers, which both have damaged fire controls. 2 tanks hit, one of which was a critical damage, and it damaged the fire control of the Night Star. All the rest miss. Next, the 2 Banshees take aim at the 2 Scouts, thinking it will be easy shots. They were completely wrong, completely missed, and then they destroyed one of the houses. Next, the light mechs behind the Black Hawk take aim. The target number is actually quite high due to all the jumping, but still the Wraith and Locust find their target, dealing 5 damage, which is enough to destroy the Black Hawk. However, the Black Hawk will still get to shoot this turn. Next up, the 3 tanks take aim at the Loki at medium range. 2 tanks hit, dealing 2 damage, which necessitated a critical hit, but it was a 9, so no critical damage. Now the Chupacabras get to shoot back, and the VTOL lights up one of the LRM carriers with its tag and calls in artillery. It seems the Chupacabra's strategy of damaging LRM carriers and then finishing them off with artillery is working. Another one goes up in flames. Next, the Night Star and the Annihilator, targeting the Centurion because it had the least amount of armor and structure. Despite having a very low target number and using lucky points, they both missed. Next, the 2 Scouts rake the damaged Commissary tank, both hitting, taking 2 more of its armor points. Before the Black Hawk was destroyed, it, as well as the Loki, the Atlas, the Archer, and the Stalker all take aim at the blue Grasshopper. The Stalker and the Atlas hit, dealing 10 damage and critically damaging its movement. And oh yeah, the cover was also destroyed from all that firepower. That brings turn 6 to a close. House Corbin has 9 mechs, 6 tanks, and 1 LRM carrier left. The Chupacabras have 6 mechs, 1 VTOL, and 2 Scouts left. Let's see what turn 7 has in store for us. Here we are in turn 7 and we roll for initiative. House Corbin wins. Chupacabras will move and shoot first. The Chupacabras move their scouts from one side of the neighborhood to the other, taking cover behind some residential buildings. House Corbin needs to do proportional movement, so they move their 3rd Lance forward and continue to move their LRM carriers forward. Next, the Chupacabras move her VTOL into position to keep line of sight on as many targets of the battlefield. Next, House Corbin activates 2 units again. The tanks, which maneuver behind the Night Star, and the 2nd Lance, which moves forward. In order to improve its TMM, the blue Grasshopper jumped. Next, the Chupacabras activate their 9th Lance. Ignoring the annoying tanks, the Night Star advances to get shots off at the Chupacabra left flank. The Annihilator advances, rotating to engage the Banshees. The Archer rotates, but doesn't do enough movement, so therefore it stands still. Now that movement is proportional, House Corbin activates 1 unit, which are his tanks, which he moves to surround the Loki. The Chupacabras activate their last unit, the 8th Lance, which elects to stand still. It appears the Chupacabras have decided to make this hill their last stand. House Corbin moves their last Lance. The Locust ground moves directly towards the Archer. The Wasp jumps forward as well, and the Wraith jumps to the top of that building. On to the shooting phase. The Chupacabras will shoot first. The Chupacabras open up again with the artillery barrage, aided by the VTOL spotter. The artillery hits the LRM carrier, inflicting 1 damage. It's still standing though. Next, the Night Star, Annihilator, Loki, and Archer fire at the red Banshee. All hit except for the Loki, dealing 16 damage, which is enough to take it down. However, the Banshee will still be able to fire this turn. Next, the Stalker shoots at the blue Grasshopper, and the Atlas fires at the red Grasshopper. Surprisingly, the Stalker rolled Snake Eyes, and missed. The Atlas rolled a 9 and did 5 damage to the red Grasshopper. Next, the 2 Scouts take aim at the Locust and fire. and 1 hit, dealing 1 damage to the Locust armor. House Corbin returns fire. The Blue Grasshopper, the LRM Carrier, the Atlas, and the Centurion take aim at the Atlas. The Atlas and Centurion hit, dealing 7 damage, removing the last of its armor. Next, the 3 tanks fire at the Loki. They are practically at point blank range, and they all 3 hit, taking out the Loki. Next, the Red Grasshopper, Wraith, Locust, Wasp, and the 2 Banshees shoot at the Archer. The 2 Banshees, Locust, and Wraith hit, dealing 13 damage, destroying the Archer. The 3 tanks behind the mech star take aim and fire. All 3 hit, taking 3 points of armor off the mech. Wow, that turn was rough for the Chupacabras. They lost 2 mechs, and were only able to take down 1 Banshee. Let's see what happens in the next turn. Here we are at turn 8 initiative, and House Corbin wins. Chupacabras will move and shoot first. Chupacabras moved their VTOL first, getting in position behind the Blue Banshee. House Corbin needed to move 2 units, so he activated his 2 lances of tanks, which moved in and surrounded the 2 scouts. The Chupacabras then moved their 2 scouts back against that house, good enough as any place for a last stand. Again, House Corbin moves 2 units. First, the Wasp and Locust ground move up the hill. The LRM Carriers move forward, and the Wraith in the first lance stand still. The Chupacabra is next to activate, and she activates the 9th lance. For a long time, she was looking at the rulebook on page 46, the section about special physical attacks. Then she got this devious smile. She then takes her Night Star and charges the Locust, basically curb stomping the Locust into the ground, dealing 4 damage, which was enough to destroy it. The Annihilator then advances towards the Blue Banshee. Shocked at the sudden loss of a mech during the movement phase, House Corbin advances their 3rd lance up the right side. Chupacabras activate their last lance, the 8th, and they back up a little bit. House Corbin activates the 2nd lance, which advances up to the Chupacabra's position. What happened next, I can only describe as a Boondock Saints firefight. The Night Star lit the Wasp up, destroying it. The Atlas opened fire on the Blue Grasshopper and destroyed it. The Annihilator and Stalker fired at the Red Grasshopper, dealing enough damage to destroy it. The artillery was called in, and it nailed the LRM Carrier, destroying it. And the VTOL shot at the Wraith and missed. The scouts fired at one of the tanks and barely scratched its armor. House Corbin shoots back, and the 3 tanks obliterate one of the scouts. The 3 tanks, the crushed Locust, and the Wasp shoot at the Night Star, all hitting, dealing enough damage to destroy it. The Atlas, Centurion, and the LRM Carrier all fire and nail the Chupacabra Atlas, which destroyed it. Finally, the Wraith, the Banshee, and the 2 Grasshoppers fire at the Annihilator. All hit except the Wraith, dealing 10 damage, which caused the weapon destroyed critical hit. That brought turn 8 to a close, and with the start of turn 9, I asked the Chupacabra player to roll some dice to see if her forces would surrender. The Scout did surrender, and the VTOL decided to bug out, but the Annihilator and Stalker, they are Chupacabras, and they don't quit. They turned their weapons on the Banshee and mowed it down. But then House Corbin returned fire and brought the Stalker down. That brought us to turn 10, and the Annihilator turned and fired on the Wraith, dealing damage but not enough to destroy it. With one last volley of fire from House Corbin, the Annihilator was dropped. House Corbin was victorious, but at a major cost. They lost 4 LRM carriers, 2 tanks, and 9 mechs. The Chupacabras lost 8 mechs and 4 scouts, including the 2 veteran mech warriors. The Battle of Frigidcape was indeed a victory for House Corbin, but they lacked the resources to capitalize on their breakthrough. During turn 14, the last turn of phase 1 of this war, the Chupacabras shored up their defensive perimeter of Azul Harbor City. The Chupacabras reluctantly evacuated Mortarboard, but that town was in a precarious position with most of its avenues of approach under enemy control. This means that House Corbin successfully captured a logistics hub, which will make the siege of Azul Harbor easier for House Corbin. For phase 1, the objectives for Chupacabras were mainly met, with the exception of losing Mortarboard to the enemy. For House Corbin, they met all of their objectives, gaining complete control over the province of Lambridge and contesting control of Hazi Valley. So turn 14 comes to a close, and with it ends phase 1 of the war. The players will now calculate victory points from phase 1, which will then give them more war chest points, buy upgrades and recruit reinforcements for phase 2 of the war. During this time, the players will take a much needed break, but we will continue to play a few campaign skirmish games just to keep us going. Phase 1 of the Battle of Blue Hole is now complete, but the war has just begun. The Battle of Blue Hole will continue. Thanks for watching.